The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport cast harsh shadows across Sarah Bennett's face as she stood frozen at Gate 27, her daughter's small hand clutched tightly in her own. Around them, the usual chaos of a busy Thursday afternoon swirled like a storm they were no longer part of. Travelers rushed past with rolling luggage and coffee cups, their faces buried in phones, oblivious to the quiet devastation unfolding at the boarding counter. Sarah's chest tightened as the gate agent, a woman with severely pulled back hair and lips pressed into a thin line of professional disapproval, slid the boarding passes back across the counter with 2 fingers, as if the paper itself were contaminated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of judgment, of doors closing, of dreams deferred yet again. Behind them, the boarding line had grown restless. Sarah could feel the heat of impatient stares boring into her back, could hear the subtle shuffling of feet and the low murmur of complaints beginning to build. Her 7-year-old daughter, Maya, pressed closer against her hip, her bright purple backpack suddenly seeming too large for her small frame. The girl's eyes, wide and confused, searched her mother's face for reassurance that Sarah wasn't sure she could provide. The gate agent's voice cut through the ambient noise with clinical precision. "Ma'am, as I've explained, these tickets expired 3 days ago. The system won't accept them. I cannot allow you to board this aircraft. There are security protocols, airline regulations." My hands are tied. Sarah's throat constricted. She had checked those tickets a dozen times, maybe more, in the weeks leading up to this moment. She had circled the date on her calendar in red marker, had set reminders on her phone, had even written it on a sticky note that she placed on her bathroom mirror so she would see it every single morning. March 16th. Today was March 16th. Wasn't it? Her hand trembled as she pulled out her phone, thumbing it awake with fingers that suddenly felt numb and clumsy. The screen glowed back at her with cruel clarity. March 19th. Thursday, March 19th. Her stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. She had miscounted. In the chaos of her life, the endless juggling of work shifts and Maya's school schedule, and the mounting stack of medical bills that seemed to reproduce on her kitchen table like malevolent organisms, she had somehow convinced herself that Thursday was the 16th. She had been so certain, so absolutely sure. But certainty meant nothing when you were wrong. "I checked," Sarah heard herself saying, though her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I was sure today was the 16th. I wrote it down." The gate agent's expression didn't soften. "Nevertheless, ma'am, the tickets are invalid. You'll need to purchase new ones if you want to fly today. You can visit the ticket counter on the main concourse. They can assist you with rebooking." The word purchase hung in the air between them like a guillotine blade. Sarah didn't need to check her bank account to know what she would find there. She had allocated every dollar with the precision of a military strategist, carving her paycheck into careful portions. Rent, utilities, groceries, Maya's school supplies, the tickets to Phoenix. There was nothing left. Not for rebooking. Not for anything. Phoenix. The very word felt like salvation just hours ago. Her sister Rachel lived there, in a modest 2-bedroom house with a spare room that had been waiting for them like a promise. Rachel had a lead on a job for Sarah at the hospital, where she worked in medical records, stable hours, benefits, the kind of position that could actually support them. Maya could enroll in a good school. They could start over, rebuild, escape the crushing weight of Denver where every street corner held a memory of Daniel, of the life they'd almost had before the accident took him away 2 years ago. 2 years. Some days it felt like yesterday. Other days it felt like a lifetime ago. But the bills from that terrible night at the hospital, they were immediate and relentless. Even with insurance, the costs had been astronomical. Experimental treatments that Daniel's doctors had insisted were necessary. Surgeries that bought them weeks instead of months. A healthcare system that demanded payment for grief. "Mommy?" Maya's voice was small, uncertain. "Are we not going to Aunt Rachel's house?" The question pierced Sarah's heart with surgical precision. She knelt down, forcing her face into something approximating calm, and brushed a strand of dark hair away from her daughter's forehead. Maya had her father's eyes, the same warm brown that could shift from serious to playful in an instant. Right now, they were clouded with worry that no 7-year-old should have to carry. "We're going to figure out, sweetie," Sarah said, hating how hollow the words sounded. "Just give Mommy a minute to think, okay?" But thinking required space, required quiet, required the luxury of time, and she had none of those things. The line behind them had grown longer, the muttering louder. Someone in the back called out, "Come on, some of us have connections to make." The gate agent glanced past Sarah with barely concealed irritation, clearly eager to move on to passengers whose lives were simpler, whose tickets worked, whose existence didn't complicate her afternoon. Sarah rose slowly, her knees protesting. At 32, she sometimes felt decades older, as if the weight of single parenthood and grief and financial desperation had compressed her bones, aged her from the inside out. She gathered their small, rolling suitcase, the one with the broken wheel that made it lisp perpetually to the left, and took Maya's hand again. "Come on, baby," she said quietly. "Let's move out of the way." They stepped aside, and immediately the line surged forward like water released from a dam. Sarah watched as travelers presented their phones and papers, watched as the gate agent smiled and nodded and scanned, and welcomed them aboard with the same mechanical efficiency she'd used to turn Sarah away. Each successful boarding felt like another door closing, another possibility evaporating. Sarah guided Maya to a row of seats near the window, away from the gate, away from the stares and the whispers. They sat down heavily, their meager luggage arranged at their feet like a small barricade against the world. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, Sarah could see their plane, a sleek silver vessel bearing the bright logo of Mountain Air on its tail. It looked so close, so achingly close. In less than 3 hours, that plane would be landing in Phoenix. Rachel would be waiting at arrivals with her bright smile and her fierce hugs and her unshakable belief that things would work out. But Sarah and Maya wouldn't be on it. Maya pulled her backpack onto her lap and unzipped it, extracting a worn coloring book and a small tin of colored pencils. She opened to a half-finished page, a garden scene with oversized butterflies and improbable flowers, and began to color with the focused intensity that children could summon even in the midst of chaos. Sarah watched her daughter's small hand move across the page, filling in petals with careful strokes of purple and pink, and felt something crack open inside her chest. How did other people do this? How did they navigate a world that seemed designed to punish every small mistake, every moment of human error? She had tried so hard to do everything right. After Daniel died, she had worked 2 jobs for months until exhaustion made her physically ill. She had cut every possible expense, had sold his truck and his tools, and anything else that might bring in a few dollars. She had applied for assistance programs and filled out endless forms and sat in countless waiting rooms, pleading her case to bureaucrats who looked at her with expressions ranging from pity to suspicion. And still, it was never quite enough. The wolf was always at the door, teeth bared, waiting for her to slip, to miscalculate, to be human. Sarah pulled out her phone again and opened her banking app with a sense of grim obligation. The number stared back at her with brutal honesty. Checking account, $87.32. Savings account, $212. She had already paid March's rent. The tickets had been purchased weeks ago, back when she still believed that today was the 16th. There was money allocated for groceries for the next week from Maya's school lunch account, for the electricity bill that was due in 5 days. If she bought new tickets, full-price tickets, she'd be looking at $500 minimum. Probably more. She'd have to choose rent or tickets, food or travel, stability or hope. It wasn't really a choice at all. Her phone buzzed in her hand, startling her. A text from Rachel. "So excited to see you guys. I've got the spare room all set up. Made Maya's favorite cookies. Can't wait." The words blurred as unexpected tears filled Sarah's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. Crying wouldn't help. Crying was an indulgence she couldn't afford. But the unfairness of it all pressed down on her like a physical weight. 3 days. She'd been off by 3 measly days. She typed back with trembling thumbs. Slight problem. We'll call you in a minute. She hit send before she could overthink it, before she could imagine the disappointment in Rachel's voice, the concern, the inevitable offer to help that Sarah would have to refuse because Rachel had her own bills, her own struggles, and Sarah was so tired of being a burden to everyone she loved. Mommy, look. Maya held up her coloring book, displaying the garden scene. She had finished the butterflies, had given them bodies of green and wings of orange and yellow. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They look happy, don't they? Sarah managed to smile. They're beautiful, sweetheart. You're very talented. Maya beamed, the praise lighting up her face in a way that momentarily banished the worry. She returned to her coloring, humming softly under her breath, a tune Sarah recognized from a cartoon they sometimes watched together on Saturday mornings, back when Saturday mornings felt like a respite instead of just another day to survive. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each one collapsing under the weight of reality. She could call Rachel, ask to borrow money, but Rachel had just helped her with last month's rent when Sarah's hours got cut at the diner. She could try to get a cash advance on her credit card, but that card was already maxed out from Daniel's final hospital stay. She could ask her manager at the diner for an advance on her paycheck, but he'd already made it clear that wasn't something he was willing to do after she'd asked twice before. The announcement system crackled to life overhead. Attention passengers on Mountain Air Flight 447 to Phoenix. We will begin boarding in approximately 10 minutes. Please have your boarding passes ready and proceed to Gate 27. First class and passengers needing additional time may board at this time. Sarah watched as people began to gather at the gate, forming loose clusters, checking their phones, adjusting their bags. A businessman in an expensive suit juggled a leather briefcase and a coffee. A young couple in matching college sweatshirts laughed about something on their phone screen. An elderly woman with a neat silver bun moved slowly with a cane, a flight attendant offering her an arm. All of them were going to Phoenix. All of them had valid tickets and working credit cards and lives that functioned according to plan. Sarah felt a surge of something ugly and hot rise in her chest, something dangerously close to envy, to anger at the cosmic unfairness of it all. She swallowed it down. Bitterness wouldn't buy them seats on that plane. She stood abruptly, startling Maya, who looked up from her coloring with wide eyes. Stay right here, Sarah instructed, making her voice firm. I'm just going to talk to someone. Don't move from this spot, understand? Maya nodded solemnly, and Sarah felt a pang of guilt at the fear that flickered across her daughter's face. But she couldn't bring Maya with her for what she was about to do. She couldn't let her daughter watch her beg. Sarah walked back toward the gate with her shoulders squared, rehearsing words in her mind. The gate agent was now processing the early boarders, scanning passes with efficient beeps, offering practice smiles and wishes for pleasant flights. Sarah waited at the edge of the counter, trying to catch the woman's eye without being intrusive. Other passengers moved past her, a steady stream of people whose days were proceeding as planned. Finally, during a brief lull, the gate agent glanced her way, and Sarah saw recognition flicker in her eyes, followed immediately by a hardening of expression. A wall going up. Before Sarah could speak, the agent said, "Ma'am, I already explained the situation. There's nothing I can do." "I understand that," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor she felt in her core. "But I was hoping maybe there was someone I could speak to. A supervisor? Maybe there's a policy, some kind of exception for circumstances like this. I made an honest mistake. I have a daughter. We have nowhere else to go." The words came out more desperate than she'd intended, and she hated herself for it, hated the pleading tone, the naked need. The gate agent's expression didn't change. "I sympathize with your situation," she said in a tone that suggested no sympathy whatsoever, "but policies exist for a reason. Expired tickets are expired tickets. The system is automated. I literally cannot override it, even if I wanted to. Isn't there anything?" Sarah pressed. "Any way to just, I don't know, get us on this flight? I'll pay the difference." I just need a little time to figure out the payment. I have a job waiting for me in Phoenix. I can pay it back." Even as she said it, Sarah knew how it sounded. Naive, unrealistic, the kind of promise that people in desperate situations made all the time, promises they had no way of keeping. The gate agent's expression confirmed it. She shook her head slowly, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Ma'am, airlines don't extend credit. You need to purchase new tickets through proper channels. Now, I really need to continue boarding. We're on a schedule." The dismissal was clear, final. Sarah felt heat rise to her face, humiliation mixing with desperation in a toxic combination. She opened her mouth to try again, to find some magical combination of words that would change the equation. But the gate agent had already turned away, was already greeting the next passenger with that same professional smile. Sarah retreated, feeling the stares of other passengers like needles against her skin. She heard fragments of conversation as she passed. Some people really need to get their act together. Always someone holding up the line. She kept her head down, refused to meet anyone's eyes, focused only on getting back to Maya. Her daughter was still coloring, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she worked on a particularly intricate flower. Sarah sank into the seat beside her, and Maya looked up, hopeful. "Are we going now?" "Not yet, baby," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're still working on it." Maya's face fell, but she nodded and returned to her coloring. Sarah stared at the gate, at the steady stream of passengers boarding, watching her chance at a new life disappear person by person. The plane would leave. It would take off without them. And they would be stuck here in Denver, in the tiny apartment with the leaking faucet and the neighbors who fought every night in a life that felt like quicksand, slowly pulling them under. Her phone buzzed. "Rachel again. What kind of problem? Do you need me to do anything?" Sarah couldn't bring herself to respond. What was she supposed to say? That she'd ruined everything over a calendar mistake? That they were stranded because she couldn't keep track of 3 simple days? The overhead announcement came again. "This is the final boarding call for Mountain Air Flight 447 to Phoenix. All remaining passengers should proceed to Gate 27 immediately. The gate will close in 5 minutes." 5 minutes. Sarah watched the last stragglers hurry toward the gate, watched the gate agent check her watch, watched the door to the jet bridge still open, but not for much longer. Through the window, she could see ground crew moving around the plane, could see luggage carts being towed away, could see all the final preparations for departure. She thought about Daniel, about the last conversation they'd had in the hospital 2 days before he died. He'd been so weak by then, his voice barely audible, but he'd gripped her hand with surprising strength and made her promise something. "Take care of her, girl. Give her a good life. Don't let this break you." She'd promised. She'd sworn she would find a way. But sitting here, watching their salvation literally roll away without them, Sarah wondered if she'd been foolish to make promises she couldn't keep. Maybe breaking was inevitable. Maybe she'd been broken for a long time and just hadn't wanted to admit it. Maya suddenly gasped, dropping her pencil. "Mommy, look." Sarah followed her daughter's pointing finger toward the windows. The plane's engines had started, the familiar wine building. In a moment, the jet bridge would retract, the door would close, and that would be that. But Maya wasn't pointing at the plane. She was pointing at something else, someone walking rapidly across the tarmac from a different direction, coming from what looked like a crew entrance. It was a man in a pilot's uniform, the crisp white shirt and dark slacks, the hat tucked under his arm. He was tall, perhaps in his early 50s, with graying hair and a purposeful stride. Sarah couldn't make out his features from this distance, but there was something familiar in the way he moved, something that tugged at a memory she couldn't quite place. The pilot reached the plane and climbed the stairs with quick efficiency, disappearing inside. Maya turned to Sarah with confused excitement. "Mommy, was it the pilot? Why was he outside?" Sarah had no answer. It was unusual, certainly. Pilots typically boarded through the jet bridge like everyone else. But aircraft operations weren't her concern. Her concern was the gate agent now speaking into her radio. Was the jet bridge beginning its slow mechanical retraction? Was the reality settling over her like a suffocating blanket that they had officially missed their flight? She stood, intending to gather their things and figure out their next move, when the gate agent's radio crackled loudly. The woman pressed it to her ear, her brow furrowing. She glanced toward the plane, then back at her radio, then spoke into it with clear confusion in her voice. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the agent's body language shift from routine to puzzled to almost alarmed. Other passengers waiting in the gate area were starting to notice too, conversations dying down as people sensed something unusual happening. The jet bridge, which had retracted about halfway, suddenly stopped. The gate agent turned and hurried down the jet bridge, disappearing from view. Moments later, she returned with another airline employee, a man in a supervisor's vest, and they conferred in urgent whispers while repeatedly glancing at the plane. Sarah's heart began to pound for reasons she couldn't articulate. Something was happening, something outside the normal script of delays and departures. Maya grabbed her hand. "Mommy, what's going on?" "I don't know, sweetheart." Sarah's voice was tight. "Just stay close to me." Then the gate agent did something completely unexpected. She looked directly at Sarah, made eye contact across the waiting area, and gestured urgently for her to approach. Not a dismissive wave, not the annoyed shooing she'd used before, but an actual summons, sharp and insistent. Sarah's legs felt like they'd been filled with concrete. She couldn't move. It didn't make sense. The flight was boarding. No, the flight had finished boarding. They'd been denied. It was over. Yet the gate agent was still gesturing, now more emphatically, and the supervisor beside her was also looking in Sarah's direction. The woman cupped her hands around her mouth and called out across the gate area, her voice loud enough to cut through the ambient noise. "Ms. Bennett? Sarah Bennett? Please come to the gate immediately." The use of her name shocked Sarah into motion. How did the gate agent even know her full name? She'd only seen the boarding passes briefly, had barely looked at them before sliding them back across the counter. Sarah's mind spun through possibilities, each one more unlikely than the last. Had she left something at the counter? Had there been some kind of mistake with the tickets after all? She grabbed Maya's hand and their luggage and moved toward the gate on legs that felt disconnected from her body. Other passengers turned to watch, curiosity evident on their faces. The gate area had taken on the electric atmosphere of something unexpected, that collective holding of breath that happened when routine shattered. As Sarah approached, the gate agent's expression was unlike anything she'd shown before. The professional mask had cracked, replaced by something that looked like genuine confusion mixed with barely suppressed disbelief. The supervisor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a name tag reading Marcus, stepped forward. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his tone careful, as if speaking to someone who might startle and bolt, "I need you to confirm something for me. You were attempting to board flight 447 to Phoenix, correct?" Sarah nodded, unable to find her voice. Her throat had gone completely dry. "And you were denied boarding due to expired tickets?" Again, she nodded. Beside her, Maya pressed close, her small hand gripping Sarah's with surprising strength. Marcus exchanged a glance with the gate agent, then looked back at Sarah. His next words came slowly, as if he himself couldn't quite believe them. "Ma'am, I need you to wait here for just a moment. The captain has requested to speak with you before departure." The words made no sense. Sarah stared at him blankly. The captain? Why would the pilot want to speak with her? Had she done something wrong? Was she in trouble? Her mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios. Maybe they thought she was trying to scam them. Maybe they were going to call security. Maybe Marcus must have seen the panic rising in her face because he quickly added, "You're not in any trouble. The captain specifically asked for you by name. He saw you at the gate, and he..." Marcus paused, seeming to struggle with how to phrase it. "He believes he knows you." The world tilted slightly. Sarah felt Maya's hand tighten in hers, felt the weight of the suitcase handle digging in her palm, felt the eyes of dozens of passengers boring in her back, but all of it seemed distant, muffled, as if she were experiencing reality from underwater. "I don't understand," she managed to say. "I don't know any pilots." Even as she said it, though, something flickered at the edge of her memory, that same tug she'd felt when she saw the figure crossing the tarmac. Something familiar, but the harder she tried to grasp it, the more it slipped away, like trying to remember a dream upon waking. Marcus gestured toward the jet bridge. "If you'll come with me, the captain would like to speak with you personally." Again, I want to assure you this is not a problem. It's just highly unusual. Unusual seemed like a catastrophic understatement. Sarah glanced down at Maya, whose eyes were huge with a mixture of fear and excitement. An adventure, her expression seemed to say, though Sarah knew her daughter well enough to see the uncertainty beneath. She looked back at Marcus, at the gate agent still standing there with that stunned expression, at the jet bridge leading into the plane. Every instinct told her to run, to grab Maya in their suitcase and get as far away from this situation as possible. When authorities asked to speak with you, when things deviated from the script, it usually meant trouble, especially for people like her, people who lived on the margins where one wrong move could cascade into disaster. But another part of her, the part that had gotten them this far despite everything, the part that had learned to recognize rare opportunities when they appeared, whispered that maybe, impossibly, this was something else. Maybe this was the universe finally deciding to throw her a line instead of another obstacle. "Okay," Sarah heard herself say. "Okay, I'll speak with him." Marcus nodded and began walking toward the jet bridge. Sarah followed, pulling their suitcase, Maya keeping pace beside her. As they passed through the gate area, she could feel the weight of all those watching eyes, could hear whispered speculation rising in their wake. The gate agent fell in a step behind them, her radio clutched in one hand. The jet bridge was a narrow tunnel of ribbed metal and dim lighting, slightly claustrophobic, smelling of recycled air and jet fuel. Their footsteps echoed hollowly. Maya stayed pressed against Sarah's side, her earlier excitement dampening in the unfamiliar environment. At the end of the tunnel, the airplane door stood open, warm light spilling out. A flight attendant stood just inside, a young woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked at Marcus, then at Sarah and Maya, her professional smile wavering slightly. When Marcus murmured something to her, she nodded and gestured deeper into the cabin. "Captain Reynolds is in the cockpit. I'll let him know you're here." Captain Reynolds. The name meant nothing to Sarah. She'd never known anyone named Reynolds. Yet as they stood in the small galley area just inside the plane door, as the flight attendant disappeared toward the front of the aircraft, that feeling of familiarity grew stronger, insistent, like a forgotten name on the tip of her tongue. Passengers already seated in first class were openly staring now, some craning their necks to see what was causing the delay. Sarah could hear the flight attendant's muffled voice from the cockpit, then silence, then footsteps. And then he emerged from the cockpit, ducking slightly through the low doorway, and Sarah's world stopped. She knew him. Dear God, she knew him. The recognition hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, making her knees go weak. The years had changed him, added gray to his hair and lines around his eyes, broadened him slightly through the shoulders, but the fundamental essence was unmistakable. Captain Michael Reynolds, the patch on his uniform read, but Sarah didn't need to read it because she knew exactly who he was. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds, United States Army. Medic. The man who had saved her brother's life in Afghanistan 12 years ago. The man who had held Tommy's hand as they loaded him onto the evacuation helicopter, who had stayed with him during those critical golden minutes when survival balanced on a knife's edge, who had written to their family afterward to tell them that Tommy was going to make it, that he was brave, that he was going to be okay. The man Sarah's family had tried desperately to find afterward, to thank, to tell him what his actions had meant, but military bureaucracy and unit transfers in time had conspired against them. They'd written letters that went unanswered, had made calls that led nowhere. Eventually, they had to accept that Lieutenant Reynolds had disappeared back into his life, that they would never be able to properly express their gratitude. And now he was standing in front of her, 12 years later, wearing a pilot's uniform instead of desert fatigues, looking at her with the same shock and recognition that must have been written all over her own face. "Sarah," he said, his voice rougher than she remembered from those old phone calls, weighted with time and distance and disbelief. Sarah Bennett, Tommy's sister. The sound of her name in his mouth, the confirmation that this was real, that he remembered, broke something loose in Sarah's chest. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Tears she'd been holding back for hours, for days, for years, suddenly threatened to spill over. Maya tugged her hand. "Mommy? Who is this man?" Michael's gaze dropped to Maya, and something in his expression shifted, softened. When he looked back at Sarah, his eyes were bright. "Your daughter?" Sarah managed a nod. "This is Maya." The words came out as barely more than a whisper. Michael crouched down to Maya's level, his movements careful, unthreatening. "Hello, Maya. I'm Captain Reynolds, but you can call me Michael. I'm an old friend of your mom's family." Maya studied him with the solemn assessment children were capable of, then apparently decided he was trustworthy because she said, "Are you the pilot of this plane?" "I am. We were supposed to be on this plane." Maya informed him with the directness of a 7-year-old, "but our tickets expired, and the lady said we couldn't come. Mommy's really sad about it." Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He stood slowly, his full attention returning to Sarah. "I was doing the pre-flight walk-around," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I always do my own external inspection. I happened to look through the terminal windows, and I saw you at the gate. It took me a moment to place you. It's been so long, but then I remembered. Tommy's little sister. You were just out of college the last time I saw a picture." Sarah found her voice finally, though it trembled. "That was 12 years ago. You saved Tommy's life. We tried to find you afterward, to thank you. But you'd already rotated out, and—" "I know," Michael said. "I got some of your letters, actually, but by the time they reached me, I was already stateside and transitioning out of the service. I should have responded. I meant to. But life got complicated and time passed, and—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "That's no excuse. I'm sorry." The apology seemed absurd given the circumstances. Sarah almost laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that she quickly swallowed. "You're sorry? You saved my brother's life, and you're apologizing for not returning letters?" Michael's expression grew more serious. "Tommy, how is he?" "He's good," Sarah said, and felt the truth of it warm her despite everything. "He's married now, has 2 kids, lives in Oregon. He's a teacher, elementary school." The explosion damaged his hearing pretty badly, but he manages. "He's happy." Something in Michael's face relaxed at that, a tension Sarah hadn't even noticed releasing. "I'm glad. I've thought about him over the years. Wonder how he was doing. There were a lot of guys I treated over there, but Tommy—" He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "He reminded me of my younger brother. Same stubborn streak, same terrible jokes, even when everything was going to hell." Sarah remembered the stories Tommy had told when he finally came home, about the medic who'd kept him talking during the evacuation, who distracted him from the pain with ridiculous conversations about baseball and bad movies. She'd created a hero's image in her mind based on those stories. But standing here now, she realized Michael Reynolds was just a man who'd done his job in impossible circumstances and somehow ended up intersecting with her life again at precisely the moment she needed it most. Marcus cleared his throat gently, reminding them all that they were standing in an airplane doorway, that there was a schedule, that reality had demands. Michael glanced at him, then back at Sarah. "I heard you were denied boarding. Expired tickets?" Sarah's shame returned in a hot rush. 3 days. I miscounted by 3 days. I thought today was the 16th. I'd saved for months to afford those tickets, but I got the date wrong, and now—" She gestured helplessly. "Now we're stuck. We were supposed to start over in Phoenix. My sister has a job lined up for me, but I can't afford to rebook, and I don't know what we're going to do." The words tumbled out faster than she intended, a desperate spillage of truth to this man who was suddenly a lifeline she hadn't known existed. Michael listened with that same focused intensity she remembered from Tommy's stories, the kind of attention that made you feel heard, truly heard, perhaps for the first time in a very long while. When she finished, Michael turned to Marcus. "How full is this flight?" Marcus checked his tablet. "We're at 92% capacity. 2 empty seats in coach." Michael nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And what's the protocol for captain's discretion boarding in unusual circumstances?" Marcus's eyebrows rose. "Captain, that's typically reserved for emergency situations, crew repositioning, things like that." I'm not sure this qualifies. I'm making it qualify, Michael said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who commanded expensive equipment and passenger lives. This woman's family saved my life in more ways than the obvious. If I can help her now, I'm going to. Check them in. Put them in those empty seats. I'll cover any fare difference out of pocket if the airline pushes back. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Michael's tone made it clear the discussion was over. The supervisor nodded slowly. I'll need to process it through the system. It might take a few minutes. Take your time, Michael said. We're not leaving this gate until Sarah and her daughter are on board. Sarah felt her legs go weak. She reached out instinctively and found herself gripping the back of a first-class seat for support. A passenger in that seat, an older man in a business suit, looked up at her with curiosity, but she barely registered him. The words Michael had just spoken didn't seem real. After everything, after all the closed doors and rejected pleas and cosmic unfairness, here was someone simply saying yes. Not because of policy or profit or obligation, but because of an old debt he felt he owed, a connection forged in a war zone half a world away that had somehow survived 12 years and countless miles to matter right now, right here. I can't, Sarah started to say, her default response to help, but Michael cut her off gently. Yes, you can. Tommy saved my sanity over there, even if he doesn't realize it. Let me do this small thing. It wasn't small, though. It was everything. Sarah felt the tears she'd been holding back finally spill over, hot and unstoppable. She pressed her free hand to her mouth, trying to maintain some dignity, but it was useless. Maya looked up at her in alarm. Mommy, why are you crying? Are you sad? No, baby. Sarah managed through her tears. I'm happy. Sometimes people cry when they're happy. Maya considered this with the seriousness she applied to all new information, then nodded as if that made perfect sense. She turned to Michael. Thank you for making my mommy happy cry. Michael's expression cracked then, his own eyes going bright. He cleared his throat roughly. You're very welcome, Maya. Now, why don't we get you two to your seats? I have a plane to fly, and we're already running a bit behind schedule. Marcus was already moving, speaking rapidly into his radio, pulling up screens on his tablet. The gate agent who'd followed them onto the plane was backing away, clearly ready to return to her post and process whatever paperwork Michael's decision required. The flight attendant hovered nearby, looking between Sarah and Michael with open curiosity. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to pull herself together. She looked at Michael Reynolds, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she hadn't even known how to form. The boarding process that followed felt surreal, like Sarah was watching herself from outside her body. Marcus worked with surprising efficiency, his fingers flying across the tablet screen as he processed their information into the system. The gate agent returned to her post, and within minutes had printed new boarding passes, these ones crisp and valid, bearing seat assignments that transformed them from outcasts to legitimate passengers. Sarah clutched the boarding passes in her hand as if they might evaporate if she loosened her grip. Maya pressed against her side, unusually quiet now, seeming to sense that something significant was happening even if she couldn't fully understand the mechanics of it. Through the airplane windows, Sarah could see the ground crew still moving about, could see the tug attached to the nose while waiting to push them back from the gate. Michael stood near the cockpit door, speaking quietly with the flight attendant, occasionally glancing back at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was warmth there, certainly, but also something else, a kind of restless energy, as if seeing her had stirred up memories he'd long ago filed away in whatever mental compartment soldiers used to store their war experiences. Marcus approached with a professional smile that didn't quite mask his confusion about the entire situation. All right, Ms. Bennett, you're all set. Seats 23A and 23B. Window and middle seat. Your luggage will be gate checked since the overhead bins are full. Sarah nodded numbly, watching as a baggage handler appeared to take their battered suitcase. She'd packed their entire lives into that case. Everything that mattered condensed into 50 pounds of clothing and photographs and Maya's favorite stuffed rabbit. Watching it disappear down the jet bridge felt like releasing the last anchor to their old life. Thank you. Sarah said to Marcus, her voice still unsteady. "Thank you for understanding." Marcus shrugged slightly, though his eyes were kind. "Thank Captain Reynolds. He's the one who made the call. I just processed the paperwork." He moved away to speak with other crew members, and Sarah found herself alone in the galley area with Maya, both of them clutching their boarding passes like golden tickets. First-class passengers had stopped staring, having apparently decided the drama was over and returned to their phones and magazines. The aircraft hummed with the ambient noise of contained humanity, conversations and rustling bags, and the distant whine of auxiliary power. Michael emerged from the cockpit again, this time carrying his flight bag, which he handed to the flight attendant with quiet instructions. When he turned to Sarah, his expression had shifted into something more formal, more controlled. "The pilot taking charge. I need to get up to the cockpit and run through pre-flight checks," he said. "We're already delayed, and I have a schedule to keep." "But Sarah," he paused, and the formality cracked slightly. "I'm glad you're on this flight. I'm glad I saw you at the gate. After we land in Phoenix, if you have time, I'd like to talk more. Properly. There are things I should have said 12 years ago." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying again. Maya, less burdened by adult emotions, piped up with cheerful directness. "Are you going to fly us all the way to Phoenix?" "I am," Michael confirmed, crouching down again to her level. "It's going to be about 2.5 hours. Have you ever flown before?" Maya shook her head, eyes wide. "This is my first time on a plane." "Well then," Michael said with a smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. "You're in for a treat. Flying is magical. When we take off, you might feel your tummy do a little flip, but that's normal. And once we're up in the air, you'll be able to see clouds right outside your window." "Will we be higher than birds?" Maya asked with the seriousness of someone asking a profound philosophical question. "Much higher," Michael assured her. "Higher than almost all birds fly. You'll be looking down on the world like you're in a dream." Maya's face lit up with pure excitement, and Sarah felt her heart squeeze painfully. This was what childhood should be. Wonder and anticipation instead of worry and fear. For too long, Maya had been forced to be older than her years, to understand concepts like eviction notices and past due bills. But in this moment, she was just a 7-year-old about to experience something amazing for the first time. Michael straightened and caught Sarah's eye. "Take care of yourself," he said quietly. "Both of you. I'll see you in Phoenix." Then he was gone, disappearing into the cockpit with the confident stride of someone who'd done this thousands of times. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Jennifer, approached with a warm smile. "Let me show you to your seats. We're going to start our final boarding procedures in just a moment." Sarah took Maya's hand and followed Jennifer down the narrow aisle. First class gave way to economy, spacious leather seats replaced by tighter rows of blue fabric. Passengers looked up as they passed, some with curiosity, others with the blank stare of frequent travelers who'd long ago stopped registering their fellow passengers as individuals. Seat 23A was on the left side of the plane, window seat with a view of the wing. Sarah helped Maya climb in first, watching her daughter's face press immediately against the small oval window, nose leaving a smudge on the plastic as she tried to take in everything at once. Sarah slid into the middle seat beside her, grateful that the aisle seat appeared to still be empty. The reality of what had just happened began to settle over her in waves. They were on the plane. They were actually on the plane. In a few hours, they would land in Phoenix where Rachel would be waiting. The job would still be there. The fresh start would still be possible. What had seemed like a catastrophic failure just 30 minutes ago had been transformed into something else entirely. But beneath the relief, Sarah felt a current of something more complex. Seeing Michael Reynolds again, having him be the agent of this rescue, it stirred up memories she'd carefully packed away. The year Tommy came home from Afghanistan had been one of the hardest of Sarah's life. Her big brother, her protector, her constant, had returned a different person. The physical wounds had healed relatively quickly, but the invisible ones had taken much longer. She'd been 21 then, fresh out of college with a degree in graphic design and no clear direction. She'd moved back home to help their parents care for Tommy during his recovery. Those months had been filled with doctor's appointments and physical therapy sessions, and nights when Tommy would wake up screaming from nightmares he couldn't or wouldn't describe. Through it all, Tommy had talked about Lieutenant Reynolds, the medic who'd kept him conscious during the evacuation, who distracted him from the pain by arguing about whether the Red Sox or the Yankees were the superior team. Tommy claimed that without Reynolds' steady presence, without his constant stream of conversation and dark humor, he would have given up right there in the dust and heat of Kandahar. Their family had wanted desperately to thank Reynolds properly, to tell him what his actions had meant. Sarah's mother had written letters to the Department of Defense. Her father had tried calling various military offices. Sarah herself had scoured social media and veterans groups trying to locate him. But Lieutenant Michael Reynolds had seemingly vanished into the vast machinery of the post-war military, and eventually they'd had to accept that some debts of gratitude would go forever unpaid. Except now, impossibly, that debt had been repaid in reverse. Michael Reynolds had recognized her at the airport gate and had used his authority to give her and Maya passage to a new life. The symmetry of it felt almost orchestrated, as if the universe occasionally decided to close loops and settle accounts in ways that defied probability. The aisle seat beside Sarah remained empty as the last passengers boarded. She watched them shuffle past, an endless parade of humanity carrying bags and pillows and the weight of their own stories. A young couple honeymooners, perhaps based on a way they couldn't stop touching each other. An older man who walked with a pronounced limp, gripping seat backs for support. A woman about Sarah's age, traveling with 3 children under the age of 6, her face a mask of exhausted determination that Sarah recognized intimately. Jennifer appeared at the front of the economy section and began the safety demonstration, her movements practiced and fluid. Sarah had seen this routine countless times in movies and television shows, but experiencing it in person felt different. More immediate, more real. The oxygen mask that would drop from overhead in case of emergency. The seat cushions that could be used as flotation devices. The nearest exits marked with illuminated signs. Maya watched the demonstration with rapt attention, absorbing every detail. When Jennifer demonstrated the proper way to fasten a seatbelt, Maya immediately checked her own, tugging at the strap to make sure it was secure. Sarah felt a surge of love, so intense it was almost painful. This resilient, brave little girl who had endured so much loss and instability and still approached the world with wonder instead of cynicism. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, passengers. This is Captain Reynolds speaking from the flight deck. On behalf of Mountain Air and our entire crew, I'd like to welcome you aboard Flight 447 with service to Phoenix. We're showing a flight time of approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes today. Weather looks good along our route, though we may encounter some light chop over the Rockies. We'll be cruising at an altitude of 36,000 feet once we reach our assigned flight level. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Sarah's breath caught slightly at the sound of Michael's voice, calm and authoritative, transformed by the intercom into something both familiar and strange. Maya squeezed her hand. "That's your friend, right? The pilot?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "That's Michael. He knew Uncle Tommy a long time ago. Is that why he helped us?" The question was innocent, but it cut to something Sarah herself was still trying to understand. "Yes, I think so. Sometimes people help us because of connections we don't even remember having, because of kindness that happened in the past." Maya nodded, as if this made perfect sense, then returned her attention to the window. The plane lurched slightly as the tug began pushing them away from the gate. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. She'd flown before, years ago, but never while carrying the weight of everything that now rested on this journey. The aircraft rolled backward, pivoted, then began moving forward under its own power. Through Maya's window, Sarah could see the terminal buildings sliding past, could see other planes parked at their gates, could see the vast infrastructure of the airport spreading out in all directions. They joined a line of aircraft waiting for takeoff clearance. inching forward as each plane ahead of them accelerated down the runway and lifted into the gray afternoon sky. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Sarah's hands gripped the armrests, her knuckles white. Beside her, Maya maintained a running commentary of everything she observed. "Look, Mommy, that plane has a red tail. Oh, there's a fire truck. Why is there a fire truck at the airport? Do planes ever catch on fire?" Sarah answered as best she could, grateful for Maya's questions because they gave her something to focus on besides her own nervousness. The woman across the aisle smiled sympathetically, recognizing a fellow mother managing a child's anxiety through distraction. Then it was their turn. The plane swung onto the runway, and even through the insulated cabin, Sarah could hear the engines beginning to spool up. The high-pitched whine grew louder, more insistent. Michael's voice came over the intercom again, calm and unhurried. "Flight attendants, please be seated for takeoff." Jennifer and the other flight attendants quickly took their positions in the jump seats. The cabin fell into expectant silence, that peculiar hush that preceded major transitions. Sarah realized she was holding her breath and forced herself to exhale slowly. Maya's small hand found hers and squeezed. The engines reached full power with a roar that vibrated through the entire aircraft. Sarah felt herself pressed back into her seat as they began to accelerate down the runway. Faster and faster, the terminal buildings blurring past, the rumble of wheels on pavement creating a thunderous rhythm. Maya's eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O of amazement. Then the rumbling stopped. The nose lifted. The ground fell away beneath them. They were flying. Sarah watched Maya's face transform with wonder as Denver dropped away below them. Buildings became toys, cars became insects, the intricate grid of streets and highways revealed itself in patterns that were invisible from the ground. Maya pressed her face against the window, breath fogging the plastic as she tried to take in everything at once. "We're flying," she whispered, awestruck. "Mommy, we're actually flying." "Yes, we are, baby," Sarah said, her own voice thick with emotion that had nothing to do with altitude. The plane banked slightly, turning west, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the Rocky Mountains in the distance, their peaks still snow-covered despite the arrival of spring. They climbed steadily, the ground receding, the clouds growing closer. Then they pierced the cloud layer, and suddenly the world transformed into something otherworldly. Above them, endless blue sky. Below, a landscape of white cotton, hills and valleys of vapor stretching to every horizon. "It's like heaven," Maya breathed, and Sarah couldn't disagree. There was something transcendent about this perspective, about seeing the Earth from a vantage point that humans had only achieved in the last century. It put things into proportion. The problems that seemed insurmountable from the ground looked different from 30,000 feet. Still real, still significant, but somehow more manageable. Less absolute. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began moving about the cabin. Some stood to retrieve items from overhead bins. Others queued for the lavatories. A flight attendant came through with a beverage cart, offering drinks and small packages of pretzels. Sarah accepted a ginger ale for Maya and a coffee for herself, black and bitter but welcome. As she sipped her coffee, Sarah's mind drifted back to Michael Reynolds. She tried to reconcile the image Tommy had painted of the young Army medic with the middle-aged pilot who'd recognized her at the gate. How did someone make that transition? From battlefield medicine to commercial aviation? What experiences bridged those two very different worlds? She thought about what Michael had said before disappearing into the cockpit. "There are things I should have said 12 years ago." What did he possibly need to say? He'd saved Tommy's life. That was enough. That was everything. Unless there was something else, some part of the story Tommy had never shared or perhaps had never known. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She'd forgotten to switch it to airplane mode. Pulling it out, she saw several missed calls from Rachel and a string of increasingly concerned text messages. The most recent one read, "Sarah, please call me. I'm worried. What's happening?" Guilt washed over Sarah. In the chaos of the gate and the boarding and the emotional reunion with Michael, she'd completely forgotten to update her sister. She quickly typed out a response. I'm so sorry. Long story, but we made it. We're on the plane right now. We'll call when we land. Everything is okay. Better than okay, actually. She hit send just as another announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds again. We've reached our cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. You're now free to move about the cabin, though I do recommend keeping your seatbelts fastened while seated in case we hit any unexpected turbulence. Our flight attendants will be coming through shortly with our beverage and snack service. Current time in Phoenix is 1:15 Mountain Time, and we're looking at an on-time arrival around 3:45. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. The intercom clicked off, and Sarah found herself wondering what it was like up there in the cockpit. She'd seen movies showing pilots at work, but the reality was probably far more mundane. Switches and gauges and computer screens. Constant communication with air traffic control. The weight of responsibility for hundreds of lives traveling at 500 miles per hour, 6 miles above the earth. Maya had finally pulled her attention away from the window and was now studying the safety card she'd found in the seat back pocket. She pointed to various illustrations and asked Sarah to explain them. What does this mean? Why are people sliding down that yellow thing? If we land in water, will we see fish? Sarah did her best to answer, though she had to admit her own knowledge of aviation safety was limited. The conversation attracted the attention of the woman across the aisle, who leaned over with a friendly smile. First time flying for your daughter? Sarah nodded. First time for both of us in a long time. She's doing great, the woman said warmly. My kids were terrified their first flight. Wouldn't stop crying until we landed. Maya beamed at the compliment, sitting up straighter. I'm not scared at all. Captain Reynolds said flying is magical. The woman's smile widened. Captain Reynolds is absolutely right. There's nothing quite like it. She returned to her own activities, and Sarah settled back in her seat, feeling the tension in her shoulders finally beginning to ease. The adrenaline that had carried her through the crisis at the gate was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to pull her under. She hadn't slept well in weeks, too many worries crowding her mind, too many what-ifs keeping her awake in the early morning hours. Now, with the crisis averted and Phoenix growing closer with each passing minute, her body was demanding payment for all those sleepless nights. Her eyelids grew heavy. The drone of the engines became almost hypnotic. Maya was still absorbed in the safety card, occasionally glancing out the window at the endless cloudscape. Sarah let her eyes drift closed, just for a moment, just to rest them. The coffee hadn't been enough to counter the exhaustion. She'd close her eyes for just a minute, and then she woke with a start to Maya shaking her arm. Mommy, the flight attendant wants to know if you want any snacks. Sarah blinked groggily, disoriented. Jennifer stood in the aisle with her card, an understanding smile on her face. I'm sorry to wake you. You look like you needed the rest. Can I get you anything? We have cookies, chips, trail mix. Just some water, please. Sarah managed her mouth dry. And Maya, what would you like? Can I have the cookies? Maya asked with the hopeful tone of a child who expected to be told no. Of course you can, Sarah said, too tired to enforce her usual rules about sugar and nutrition. One package of cookies wouldn't ruin Maya's dinner. Jennifer handed over the items along with napkins, and Sarah noticed the flight attendant's expression held something beyond professional courtesy. There was a knowingness there, a kind of recognition that suggested she'd been briefed on their situation. Sarah wondered how much Michael had told the crew, how much they knew about the expired tickets and the last-minute reprieve. Thank you, Sarah said quietly, meaning it for more than just the water and cookies. Jennifer nodded, seeming to understand the deeper gratitude. You're welcome. If you need anything else during the flight, anything at all, just let me know. She moved on with her cart, and Sarah watched Maya carefully open the package of cookies, breaking them into precise halves before eating each piece. Her daughter had developed rituals around food, small ceremonies that gave her a sense of control in a life that often felt chaotic. Sarah recognized the behavior because she engaged in similar patterns herself. Counting steps, organizing objects by size, creating order wherever possible. The flight continued smoothly, the plane eating up the miles between Denver and Phoenix. Sarah dozed intermittently, never quite achieving deep sleep, but managing to rest in that twilight state between waking and dreaming. Maya alternated between looking out the window and playing a simple game on Sarah's phone, her earlier excitement settling into contentment. At some point, Sarah became aware of movement in the cockpit. Through the gap between the drawn curtain and the bulkhead, she caught glimpses of activity. A different pilot emerged, a younger man who Sarah assumed was the co-pilot, and made his way to the lavatory. Minutes later, he returned, and shortly after that, Michael appeared. He'd removed his jacket and hat, was just in his white uniform shirt with epaulets marking his rank. He spoke quietly with Jennifer near the galley, accepting a bottle of water and what looked like a sandwich. Sarah watched him peripherally, not wanting to stare, but unable to completely look away. Even in profile, even engaged in the mundane act of eating a sandwich, there was something about him that commanded attention. A steadiness, a quiet competence. As if sensing her gaze, Michael turned. Their eyes met across the cabin, and Sarah felt her breath catch. He said something to Jennifer, then began making his way down the aisle toward her seat. Passengers looked up as the captain passed, some with curiosity, others with the reflexive respect afforded to anyone in uniform. Michael stopped at row 23 and crouched in the aisle, bringing himself to eye level with Sarah. Maya looked up from the phone, recognized him, and broke into a delighted smile. "Captain Mike, we're so high up. I could see clouds under us." Michael returned her smile with genuine warmth. "Pretty amazing, isn't it? Are you enjoying your first flight?" "It's the best thing ever," Maya declared with the absolute certainty of childhood enthusiasm. "I'm glad to hear it." Michael's gaze shifted to Sarah. "How are you holding up?" "Better now," Sarah admitted. "I still can't quite believe this is happening, that we're actually on this plane, that you were the pilot." Michael's expression grew more serious. "I almost missed you. If I'd walked around to the other side of the aircraft for my inspection, if the timing had been just 30 seconds different, I wouldn't have looked through those terminal windows at that exact moment." Makes you wonder about coincidence versus something else. Sarah knew exactly what he meant. She'd been thinking the same thing. The precise alignment of circumstances that had to occur for this moment to happen defied easy explanation. Michael being assigned to this specific flight. Sarah miscounting the days, but still showing up at the airport. Michael choosing to do his walk-around inspection at that exact time. Any one of those variables shifting even slightly, and they would have missed each other entirely. Tommy would say it was fate, Sarah said quietly. He's big on that now. Says that after what happened to him in Afghanistan, after surviving when so many others didn't, he can't believe it's all just random chance. Michael nodded slowly. "I used to think everything was random, just probability and physics. But I've seen too many things that seemed orchestrated somehow. Too many moments of impossible timing." He paused, seemed to struggle with something, then continued. "The day Tommy was injured, I wasn't supposed to be there. My unit was stationed at a different forward operating base. But there was a medical emergency at Tommy's outpost. Their regular medic had been evacuated the day before with appendicitis, and I got pulled into cover. Just for that one day." Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms despite the cabin's regulated temperature. She hadn't known that detail. Tommy had never mentioned it in any of his retellings of that day. So if their regular medic hadn't gotten appendicitis, Sarah said slowly, working through the implications, you wouldn't have been there when the IED went off. And Tommy might not have made it, Michael finished quietly. The first responding medic makes all the difference with those kinds of injuries. The golden hour, we called it. Get them stabilized and evacuated within 60 minutes, and survival rates go way up. Past that window. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Maya, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening over her head, tugged on Michael's sleeve. "Are we almost there? To Phoenix?" Getting closer, Michael assured her. "Probably another hour or so. You'll start feeling the plane descend when we get near. Your ears might pop a little, but that's normal. Just swallow or yawn and it'll feel better." "Okay," Maya said seriously, as if receiving crucial instructions for a dangerous mission. Michael straightened, his knees popping slightly with the movement. "I should get back to the flight deck. Just wanted to check on you both. Sarah, when we land, Before you disembark, I'd like to give you my contact information. If you need anything while you're getting settled in Phoenix, or if you just want to talk, please reach out. I will, Sarah promised, meaning it. And Michael, thank you. For everything. For today, and for 12 years ago. For Tommy. Michael's jaw tightened slightly, emotion flickering across his features before he controlled it. Take care of that little girl. She's lucky to have you. He moved back toward the front of the cabin, and Sarah watched him go, thinking about chains of causation, about how one person's appendicitis could set in motion a sequence of events that would still be generating effects more than a decade later. If that unknown medic hadn't gotten sick, Tommy might have died in Afghanistan. Sarah might have never moved home to help with his recovery. She might never have met Daniel at the veteran support group, where she'd accompanied Tommy. Maya might never have been born. Every moment was built on foundations of previous moments, stretching back into a past so complex and interconnected that tracing all the threads was impossible. But sometimes, rarely, you got to see one of those threads clearly. Got to follow it from cause to effect and marvel at the intricate weaving of all. The plane began its descent into Phoenix about 40 minutes later. Sarah felt the change in engine pitch, felt the slight forward tilt as they started losing altitude. Maya pressed her face to the window again, watching as the cloudscape gave way to glimpses of the landscape below. Desert brown and city gray, highways like silver ribbons, housing developments spreading across the valley in neat geometric patterns. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime, and Michael's voice returned to the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival. Local time is 3:20 Mountain Time, and we're looking at an on-time landing. Current temperature in Phoenix is a pleasant 78 degrees. On behalf of myself and the entire crew, thank you for choosing Mountain Air. We know you have choices when you fly, and we appreciate your business. Sarah's heart began to race with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They were almost there, almost to Rachel and the new job and the fresh start. But landing also meant disembarking, meant saying goodbye to Michael, meant stepping into an uncertain future with nothing but hope and determination and a battered suitcase full of their belongings. The plane descended steadily, dropping through layers of atmosphere. Sarah's ears popped despite her best efforts to equalize the pressure. Beside her, Maya was yawning repeatedly, mouth opening wide like a little bird. Through the window, Phoenix grew larger and more distinct. Sarah could make out individual buildings now, could see cars on the freeways, could see the airport itself coming into view. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical grinding sound that made Maya gasp. 3 green lights. Michael had probably just confirmed, a phrase Sarah remembered from a movie she'd watched years ago. The plane banked into its final approach, lined up with the runway, dropped lower and lower until Sarah could see details on the ground, could see runway lights and markings, could see the threshold rushing up to meet them. The wheels touched down with a chirp of rubber on concrete, and the engines reversed with a roar of deceleration. The plane shuddered and slowed, and Sarah realized she'd been gripping the armrests so hard that her fingers ached. They were down. They were safe. They had made it. Spontaneous applause broke out in the cabin. That curious tradition of passengers celebrating a successful landing as if it were anything other than routine. Sarah found herself clapping too, though her applause was for more than just the landing. It was for the entire improbable journey, for expired tickets that became valid, for chance encounters that felt like destiny, for second chances and new beginnings. Welcome to Phoenix, Michael's voice said over the intercom, warmth evident even through the electronic filtering. Local time is 3:32. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we've reached the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. Thank you again for flying Mountain Air, and we hope to see you again soon. The plane taxied toward the terminal, weaving through the vast infrastructure of the airport. Other planes passed in the opposite direction, heading out for their own journeys to distant cities. Ground crew in bright vests guided them with practiced hand signals. Finally, the plane swung into position at a gate, and the engines wound down into silence. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and immediately passengers were on their feet, pulling bags from overhead bins, crowding the aisle in that peculiar urgency that overtook people at the end of flights. Sarah and Maya remained seated, letting the crush pass. There was no hurry. Rachel knew they were delayed. A few extra minutes wouldn't matter. As the cabin emptied, Jennifer appeared at their row. Captain Reynolds asked if you could wait until after the other passengers have deplaned. He'd like to speak with you before you leave. Of course, Sarah said, her pulse quickening slightly. Maya looked up at her with curious eyes, but didn't ask questions. They sat in their row as the last passengers filed past, as the cabin grew quiet, as the cleaning crew began to appear with their equipment. Finally, Michael emerged from the cockpit. He'd put his jacket back on, had retrieved his flight bag. The co-pilot followed him out, a young man with sandy hair who nodded politely to Sarah as he passed. Michael waited until they were relatively alone, just him and Sarah and Maya and Jennifer tidying up in the galley. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, which he handed to Sarah. That's got my personal cell on it. I meant what I said earlier. If you need anything, call me. I don't know what your situation is in Phoenix, what resources you have, but I'd like to help if I can. Sarah took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. The contact was electric, charged with everything unspoken between them. You've already helped more than you know. Michael shook his head. One plane ticket doesn't begin to cover what your family did for me. And I don't just mean Tommy, though keeping him alive was important. I mean all of you. The letters your mother wrote, even though they didn't reach me until much later. The fact that you tried to find me, to thank me, when I was just doing my job. That meant something. Still means something. You saved my brother's life, Sarah said, her voice thick. That's not just doing your job. That's giving us back someone we love. Nothing we could do would ever repay that. Maybe, Michael conceded. But let me try anyway. Promise me you'll call if you need help. Job hunting, finding a place to live, even just someone to talk to who understands what it's like to start over. Promise. I promise, Sarah said, and she meant it. Maya, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Are you going to come visit us? At our new house in Phoenix? The question hung in the air, innocent and loaded with implications. Michael glanced at Sarah, clearly not wanting to overstep, and she found herself nodding slowly. If you want to, if you have time, I think Rachel would love to meet you. She's heard all of Tommy's stories too. Michael's face broke into a genuine smile, the first truly unguarded expression Sarah had seen from him. I like that very much. They made their way off the plane together, Michael walking with them through the jet bridge and into the terminal. Other passengers gave them curious looks, wondering why the captain was escorting these particular passengers. Sarah didn't care. Let them wonder. Let them make up whatever stories they wanted. The truth was strange enough. At the end of the jet bridge, where the terminal opened up into the gate area, Michael stopped. I should let you go. I'm sure your sister is waiting. He was right. Sarah scanned the crowd gathered beyond the security checkpoint and spotted Rachel immediately, her sister's familiar face breaking into a relieved smile when their eyes met. Rachel waved frantically, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Sarah turned back to Michael, suddenly unsure how to say goodbye to someone who had just altered the trajectory of her life. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. It's plenty, Michael assured her. Go. Start your new life. And Sarah, he paused, making sure she was really hearing him. You're going to be okay. Both of you. I can tell. You're a survivor. The words settled over Sarah like a benediction. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and took Maya's hand. Come on, baby. Aunt Rachel is waiting. They walked toward the security checkpoint, toward Rachel's beaming face, toward whatever came next. Sarah glanced back once and saw Michael still standing there, watching them go, his expression unreadable at this distance. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he returned it. Then they were through the checkpoint, and Rachel was pulling them both into a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face, words tumbling out in a rush about how worried she'd been, how relieved she was, how everything was going to be different now. Better, they'd make it work together. Sarah let herself be held, let herself believe in fresh starts and second chances and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the universe sometimes decided to be kind. Behind them, Unseen, Michael Reynolds turned and walked back toward the crew areas, his phone already out, already texting Tommy Bennett for the first time in 12 years. Found your sister at the airport. Long story. Can we talk? The response came almost immediately. Mike? Lieutenant Reynolds? Is this really you? Michael smiled as he typed his response. It's really me. I have so much to tell you. And in that moment, 12 years of silence ended, old connections rekindled, and the intricate web of cause and effect that had brought them all to this moment continued its mysterious work of weaving lives together across time and distance and the simple grace of human kindness. 3 months had passed since that flight from Denver, and Sarah stood in the kitchen of their small rental house, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a modest backyard where Maya played with the neighbor's dog. The job at the hospital had become permanent. Her paycheck arrived reliably every 2 weeks. The bills were getting paid on time. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, watching Sarah prepare dinner with an expression of contentment. You look different, she observed. Lighter somehow. Sarah smiled, chopping vegetables with steady hands that no longer trembled from exhaustion and stress. I feel different, like I can finally breathe. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Michael. Still coming for dinner tomorrow? Tommy says he's bringing his famous potato salad. The message made Sarah's heart lift in a way that still surprised her. Over the past months, Michael had become a steady presence in their lives. Not intrusive, never overstepping, but reliably there. He'd helped Sarah navigate the job's probation period, offering advice from his own experiences of starting over after leaving the military. He'd taken Maya to a children's museum on his day off, giving Sarah time to attend a crucial meeting with her new supervisor. He'd simply shown up when it mattered. Tomorrow's dinner would be the first time he'd see Tommy in person since Afghanistan. Her brother was flying in from Oregon with his family, eager to reunite with the man who'd saved his life. Sarah had arranged everything carefully, wanting the moment to be perfect. She texted back, "We're all set." Maya's been counting down the days. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her eyes knowing. He's good for you. Both of you. Sarah didn't deny it. There was something growing between her and Michael, something neither of them had named yet, but both acknowledged in small gestures and lingering glances. It was cautious and careful, built on friendship first, but it was real. He understands, Sarah said quietly. He knows what it's like to carry heavy things, to start over, to wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. The next evening, Tommy arrived with his wife and children, and the house filled with noise and laughter. Sarah watched her brother embrace Rachel, watched him swing his kids around, watched him settle into the familiar rhythms of family. He looked good, healthy, happy. The shadows that had haunted him after the war had finally faded. When Michael's car pulled into the driveway, Tommy went still. Sarah saw her brother's hands shake slightly as he moved toward the door. She stayed back, letting this moment belong to them. Michael stepped out his car, and for a long moment, the two men just stared at each other across the yard. Then Tommy was moving, crossing the distance in quick strides, and they collided in an embrace that spoke of gratitude and survival and bonds forged in circumstances most people would never understand. Sarah heard Tommy's voice break as he said, "You kept me alive. You kept me talking when all I wanted to do was let go." Michael's response was too quiet to hear, but Sarah saw his shoulders shake, saw him grip Tommy tighter. When they finally separated, both men were wiping their eyes without shame. The evening unfolded with warmth and stories, and the kind of easy connection that made Sarah realize this was what family could be. Not just blood relations, but people who showed up, who stayed, who chose each other through circumstance and care. Maya sat on Michael's lap during dinner, completely comfortable, telling him about her new school and her friends and the drawing she'd made of an airplane that her teacher had hung on the classroom wall. After the meal, after the kids were occupied with a movie in the living room, Michael found Sarah on the back porch. The Phoenix evening was cooling down, stars emerging in the darkening sky. "Thank you for tonight," he said, standing beside her at the railing. Seeing Tommy, knowing he's okay, it closes something that's been open for a very long time. Sarah turned to face him, this man who had appeared at precisely the right moment and changed everything. "I keep thinking about what you said on the plane. about coincidence versus something else. I don't think it was random, you being there that day. Michael's expression grew serious. Neither do I. I think some debts are meant to be repaid. Some connections are meant to be renewed. And some people are meant to find each other, even if it takes 12 years and a series of impossible circumstances. He reached for her hand, and Sarah let him take it. His palm was warm, solid, steady. Everything she hadn't known she needed. I'm glad you saw me at that gate, Sarah said softly. I'm glad you looked through that window at exactly the right moment. Michael smiled, squeezing her fingers gently. So am I. More than I can say. Inside, they could hear Maya's laughter, Tommy's voice telling a story, Rachel moving through the house with the comfortable authority of someone who belonged. The life Sarah had fought so desperately to reach was no longer a distant hope, but a present reality, built on kindness and chance and the mysterious way the universe sometimes decided to intervene. Sarah looked at Michael Reynolds, at this man who had saved her brother and then, years later, had saved her too. She thought about expired tickets and last-minute reprieves, about soldiers who became pilots, about single mothers who learned to accept help, about little girls who got to experience the magic of flight. Sometimes rescue came from unexpected places. Sometimes the people who saved you were the ones you thought you'd never see again. And sometimes, when you'd lost everything and were counting coins at an airport gate, the universe sent you exactly what you needed in the form of a pilot who remembered, who cared, who acted. Stay, Sarah said quietly, meaning more than just the evening, and Michael's answer was immediate. I'm not going anywhere. Above them, planes crossed the night sky, carrying passengers toward their own destinations, their own stories, their own moments of crisis and salvation. But here, in this backyard in Phoenix, Sarah Bennett had found what she'd been searching for all along. Not just a fresh start, but a true home. Not just survival, but a life worth living. And in Michael's steady presence, she found something she thought she'd lost forever. The possibility of being truly seen, truly understood, and choosing to build something new from the rubble of what came before. Maya called from inside, asking for her mother, and Sarah squeezed Michael's hand once more before turning to go. He followed her into the warmth and light of the house, into the noise and love of family gathered, into the future they were all building together, one day at a time. The story that began with expired tickets and desperate prayers had transformed into something neither Sarah nor Michael could have predicted. But standing there surrounded by people they loved, they both understood that sometimes the best journeys were the ones you never planned, and the most important destinations were the ones you found along the way. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.